It's coming to an end, folks. They can, they can dance, they can jiggle all they want. Let me make it very, very clear to my old Liberal friends. Find another job. Do something else. Stop grifting, because you are going to be out of work the moment there's an election called, and you know that. It's coming. Sure as the day is bright.
Dan McTeague is a seasoned energy analyst, former Liberal Member of Parliament, and President of Canadians for Affordable Energy. With over 2 decades of experience in public service and deep insights into energy markets, Dan is a leading voice on the challenges and opportunities shaping Canada's energy landscape. Known for his candid and often critical commentary on the current Liberal government, he has been outspoken about the impacts of policies like carbon taxes and energy regulations, which he argues increase the cost of living and undermine Canada's resource sectors.
Let's take a look. Dan McTeague, welcome to, I should say the Honourable Dan McTeague, welcome to Northern Perspective.
Well, I'll talk to my wife about the honourable part, but good to be here as well on Northern Perspective.
It's really an honor to have you here. As many of you probably know, the Honourable Dan McTeague, he is a veteran of Parliament. He was a former Liberal MP from 1993 until 2011. He is very, I would say, direct, and he's another former Liberal, in addition to Bob Bertina, that we just have immense respect for, because the party does not dictate his principles, and he's not afraid to make his principles known. So, Dan, let's just get right into it. This Liberal Party that has been in power from 2015 until present day, do you even recognize it from your time in Parliament?
Well, absolutely not. And of course, I had trouble with it almost from day one when I realized the quality and caliber of the candidates that were there. I was really willing to give them the benefit of the doubt because I had support from a number of angles, including when Justin Trudeau was a backbencher and I was on the front bench of the Liberal opposition at the time of the caucus from 2008 to 2011. And I thought greater things. I didn't think the Liberal Party was going to come back that quickly. Remember, it had been defeated. I know I went down with that party in 2011. After you have such a significant event, unless some dramatic circumstance takes place, normally it takes 2 to 3 terms for the party to rebuild itself, policy, organization, funding, and just a sense in the country of things needing to go in a very different direction. Instead, the Liberal Party got a break. It had the name Justin Trudeau, the name Trudeau most importantly, and that was enough to get the party to go from 3rd place to 1st place. That's actually almost a historical first by our own definition, by our own political experience. But it suggested to me that there was something afoot. Justin Trudeau was not like his father. I worked for his father in 1981 when I worked on the Hill with the guy named Paul Cosgrove, Minister of Housing, when we had 22% interest rates. So Justin was a very different individual from his father, wasn't an intellectual, and certainly didn't have much to run on other than the idea that Canada was a post-national state, which very much alarmed me, as it did many others, because what he was really saying is that our identity doesn't matter, our country doesn't matter, and he would govern very differently at the extreme far left of the political spectrum, the socialist spectrum, and of course he would not take into account the financial struggles that had happened a decade before when we were in power, trying to arrest the major deficit in this country, trying to keep the country united and trying to find common consensus grounds on which we could govern. All that was cast away in terms of, I don't mean to be disparaging, but it looks like socks, sobbing, selfies, and nice hair was the way in which Canadians began to vote. And it had disastrous consequences. 10 years later, we're in real trouble. And why? Well, because it's 2025.
Yeah, not because it's 2015, as Canadians will recall that quote as to why Justin Trudeau had a split cabinet of male and female based on gender, not based on merits. So, and to your point, we certainly are in 2025, I would say, because of merit or lack thereof. So as you see what happened with Chrystia Freeland, the subsequent resignation of Trudeau, or forced resignation rather, and what is happening in this leadership race, one thing that we see is that you have sitting cabinet ministers now trying to not even ask, but they're just trying to assume that Canadians are going to forget that they all had a hand in all of the policies that they voted on, on suspending the Charter of Rights and Freedoms during the Emergencies Act. They had a hand on the affordability crisis and everything. What do you make of that? Actually being part of the Liberal Party as it was essentially on its downswing in 2011. Like, what do you make of this going on right now?
Well, the Liberal Party is a monolith. Everything is invested in the great leader and the policies of the handful of people around him, the Gerald Busses, the Katie Telfords, and there's no deviation from that. In my time, it was very different. The Liberal Party members of Parliament could speak up when they wanted to, when they had to, and weren't reprimanded because they happened to speak up on a matter of principle or of demonstrating fundamental differences, which makes up our country. The Liberal Party guided itself with the idea of consensus building, of trying to find common ground and a pragmatism. That was completely and utterly thrown away. And so what Justin Trudeau's faced with is really a caucus that hasn't been able to distinguish itself, nor any of its members, from him. And even his would-be suitor, Mark Carney, is very much aligned with what Justin Trudeau has been doing, certainly on the green front, in terms of deconstructing the economics, the viability of our economy, especially its energy sector, but others as well, in pursuit of a goal that is both questionable, dubious, unscientifically proven, and at the same time meant to financially constrain Canada. By any other measure, if I were to do something like that, it'd be considered economic treason or a form of economic vandalism. But here we are, a Liberal Party that cannot face the fact that it is not prepared to change, even though the evidence is very clear. And I've made it very clear for the past 7 years, and being very, very direct with people. The carbon tax would kill the country. It would kill the ability for Canadians to make ends meet. The electric vehicle mandate, which is part of the whole net zero fanaticism that this government has embraced, and its suitor, Mark Carney, and others have talked about, is also up in smoke. Like it or not, it's gone. It's over. It's history. No more grift, no more subsidies. We also know that emissions caps will kill the oil and gas sector, the number one generator of revenues for, yes, us here in Ontario and the land of Canada and Quebec. Like it or not, it pays for equalization. It pays for our pensions. It pays for our social programs. It pays for our hospitals. It even pays for municipalities who, unwittingly and perhaps without much thought, go around saying, well, maybe we should shut down natural gas plants. Look, what we've seen here is a Liberal Party that cannot break away from its far left lurch. It's move towards an ideal that is both deadly in terms of a country that is as diverse in thought as ours, as well as likely to lead the country down a very, very dark path of economic perdition, for which Canadians are not going to be able to recover. And many feel that the weight of unaffordability is beginning to harm in ways that they could never imagine just a few years ago.
Well, and you mentioned Mark Carney, which is, I think anyone who's paying attention, they know that who is going to be essentially the successor of Justin Trudeau, the unelected Mark Carney, but that is allowed in our political system, as was the case with John Turner back in the 80s. So, but he has said in his less than energetic campaign launch that the Liberal Party needs to move back towards the center, and he's going to be the one to do that. After all, he's the economist, and he's the best equipped to deal with this. Should Canadians believe him?
He's the worst person to deal with this. And if you don't like what Justin Trudeau's done, you're going to hate what he did. He's Justin Trudeau 2.0. He's the man that's been behind the green grift and the green scam that has hurt the Canadian economy and has hurt Canadians generally, while at the same time doing nothing except furthering the interests of a handful of individuals who've decided maybe it's a good idea to get our companies to invest in Brazil, the Middle East, and build pipelines there while blocking them here in Canada. And now Canada finds itself with a tariff war in which our so-called trump card is oil and gas. Imagine if we had a couple pipelines that people like Mark Carney weren't so prepared to definance and to block. We'd have options to sell to other countries who would definitely take, because there is a business case like what Trudeau says, for our natural gas and oil. Countries like, I know, South Korea, Germany, Latvia, Lithuania, Greece. I mean, the list goes on. The number of countries that came to Canada, we said, no, there's no business case. Look, I mean, I have nothing personally against Mr. Carney, but to believe that a guy with, has had to leave his job here in Canada, go to Britain, and then find himself head of an organization called GFANZ, the Global Financial Alliance for Net Zero, now being subject to rumors and potentially pursuit of concerns by the U.S. antitrust of cartelization of the investment sector. I think it's very, very serious. We have banks now walking away from it in Canada and saying this is really very, very bad. Not just because Donald Trump was elected, because in of itself, last year when the Biden administration was in power, there was this feeling that this would treat, and it would definitely invite an antitrust investigation in which, unlike Canada, where our competition bureau, having worked on this thing for over 10 years, is really very hard to prove any type of illegal activity. The United States is based on balance of probabilities, which is basically a civil case. And if you are seen, as Mr. Carney, his group, as trying to stifle capital from getting to the oil and gas sector, you are going to be subjected to triple damages. So if the damage is $4 billion, it's triple. You're going to be subject to a $12 billion lawsuit, and it will be enforceable. So that's why I think a lot of these smart banks and investment companies have walked away from this place like a bad smell, and that's Mark Carney's legacy. But I don't want to get beyond that, because I think I want to see how much rope he's willing to sell himself in order to hang himself, because I think the Liberal Party has a real problem. They need, at the very least, to get rid of the Mark Carneys and the Stephen Guilbeaults and others like that who have done much damage to the economy and who represent the past 10 years, not the next 10 years.
So do you think that there is room for green policies within the Liberal Party?
Well, I think the Liberal Party should have just redefined itself as a green party. I think the world has had enough of this. They've seen what it's done to European manufacturing, cost of living, the ability for people to make ends meet, the fact that Russia is playing the game against Europe, that the United States has to provide LNG because Canada, of course, won't, even though we had 17 projects before they did. They were ready to go. We decided not to make them go. We blocked them. We stopped them from happening. We did everything we could to stop them. I think for the Liberal Party, the green issue is now way down, 7th, 8th, 9th concern. It's not a concern. Why? Because as people like Dan McTeague, myself, said 7, 8 years ago, there would come a time in which affordability would come to play. Why is that important? As a politician, I learned very much the idea that the moment you have policies that start to undermine, hurt, and take away from Canadians' ability to make ends meet, that's the day you can pretty much kiss your party goodbye. And the extent to which this particular cult of liberalism has given itself to that kind of knowledge without any repercussions and cling to power without even Parliament being open, having a new prime minister without any electoral approbation of the election of the nomination. I mean, the extent to which the Liberal Party has found itself way out of whack from reality and public concern, I think demonstrates that if that's what green is all about, then Canadians should be green with anger.
And you mentioned Mark Carney was Governor of Bank of Canada. You were in government while he was Governor of Bank of Canada. He has been making the rounds, essentially taking sole credit for getting Canada out of the 2008 financial crash. Based on your head shaking, I can tell your thoughts on it. But let's get some detail behind that.
Unmitigated horse pucky. Look, the reason we got out of the 2008 had a lot to do with the work that was done by the previous government, Paul Martin, to a lesser extent the Harper government, a lot to do with David Dodge, his predecessor. Because basically how we got in that global economic meltdown was that of mortgages being given out, very interesting synthetic type of financial items that were being concocted in places like the United States and to a lesser extent Europe that basically gave money to people who could not possibly afford it. In Canada, a decade before, a guy named Paul Martin Jr., who's my boss, became prime minister, and went to war with a guy named Matthew Barrett. A lot of people never forget this, but punched in Matthew Barrett, Bank of Montreal. He was a chair at the time. I don't speak ill of the dead. I think he's passed on. But his idea was, let's let's use depositors' money in Canada and go invest it in all these exotic, toxic, weird type of things that would eventually lead to a global meltdown in which assets were started to burn down. Canada avoided that mostly because it never engaged in that kind of practice to begin with. You went out and got a mortgage. They made sure you had the financing to be able to afford, even if mortgages had gone up. So yes, while we had a downturn in 08, 09, Mark Carney cannot take credit for that. That's something that happened by his predecessors who put in place the economic firewall to make sure that that wouldn't happen. Also, committees like the one I belong to, the industry committee, myself, David Sweet, before that, James Verjot, who's now, of course, the Alberta point man in Washington, D.C., came up with a plan, along with our other colleagues, unanimous plan, to say, let's do things like, for instance, give manufacturing and all business a quicker timeline of depreciation. So rather than your equipment depreciating every 5 years, we could ever do it every 2 years. That way, companies said, well, we have now an incentive to invest and reinvest and kick the economy into higher gear. So, no, I mean, Mark can take a lot of credit. That'd be like me taking credit for the work that we did in the industry committee. There's a lot of reasons why it happened, but most importantly, it was a fiscal, prudent management of governments, not of the Bank of Canada, that got us through that tough time. And for Mark to take credit for that, pretty much an example of shameless self-promotion.
Yeah, it's interesting. Even we've noticed on our own channel, as well as like our Facebook or X profiles, there seems to be a lot of pro-Carney responses. I think that I think they're bots. Quite frankly, they're either bots or volunteers, and they're going around to different.
There's Katie's killers. They're her trolls, and they're paid by Katie. I either punt them through the end zone, but before I do, I normally make them look really bad because I got, I don't know, 50,000, 60,000. I don't play that game with them because I don't have time for it. But the danger they have is that they cannot take away from what I know. And they know I was their point man when it came to consumer issues and rebates. Listen, I was the first one to put rebates out for Canadians on energy back in 2000 and again in 2003 on the work I did is on the gas report, the report that I wrote in 1998, which changed things overnight. But the point is that for a lot of these liberals, and I see a lot of these trolls, you look at them, they have 25 followers. The rest of them who have bigger numbers, they're receiving money from the federal government. I encounter them all the time, and I know who they are because I know who the people are. I still have enough contacts within the old Liberal Party to know them. So
one of the things that the Conservatives keep talking about Mark Carney is the fact that he is a environment fanatic. His book, for those that haven't read it, is a little disturbing in terms of a lot of the potential changes that it hints at. It sounds like he wants to evolve Canada into more of a technocracy rather than a democracy. He wants to control what people buy just by making things so expensive that you could never buy it, and under the illusion of, well, it's still a free market, but if you want to buy that gasoline powered car that we're going to make sure that costs $100,000 now you can't buy it, and you're going to be forced to buy the quote unquote green vehicles. But the Conservatives have painted him as the boogeyman. You've talked about him as Trudeau 2.0. But he's trying to position himself as this now center left, just like the Paul Martin and Jean Chrétien parties, and that's what he's been trying to convince Canadians that he is. What cutting through everything, what should Canadians really be afraid of with Mark Carney?
Well, trying to find where this party finds itself on the spectrum has it at the far left. It isn't the center where we were. And it wasn't a party that pursued socialism. But this is a party that, and its parent would-be leader, Mark Carney, would like to see systems like social credit. So in other words, reduce the standard of living in the country, have people driving around on bicycles in their 15-minute cities, which is why Stephen Guilbeault supported him, impose on Canadians hardship, the likes of which they are starting to experience and they don't like. While at the same time, the rest of the world is passing us by, watching our economic performance Our GDP per capita dropped to the lowest levels among OECD countries inevitably. This is a man who represents continuity of bad policy. This is the face, the man behind the curtains, if you will, operating the levers on Justin Trudeau. So as the country has declined, a lot of people ask, well, where's this coming from? From a man who obviously had very little interest in investing in Canada, a lot more interest in making sure that the things he doesn't like are invested abroad, whether he's a technocrat or not. I think it's important because he tries to present himself as being something that he clearly is not. He has no common sense of what people are going through. He is a person who has been lifted on a silver spoon, and I take nothing away from the fact that he's probably very talented in what he does, but he's not right suited for what is required in politics, and that's the ability to understand ordinary person's struggles. He doesn't get it. In fact, he's had everything to do with making the life and the ordeal of most Canadians that much more arduous and difficult. And so for that reason, he is an easier target, in my view, than Justin Trudeau. We know Trudeau was a bit of a goof, never really all he had was the last name, but he's done some really dumb things. Mark Carney is very unapologetic. The very fact that he has Gerald Butts and Katie Telford and the same group of Liberals behind Justin Trudeau behind him, that should be an alarm, as well as his wife. And I don't like to bring in, our backgrounds, but his wife is part of the Eurasia group, part of the most militant of climate, catastrophists out there, Diane Fox, I should say, Carney. There's no doubt in my mind these people are committed to their green agenda, which it does not include human beings in terms of their ability to make ends meet unless they're prepared to accept a significant decline in their standard of living according to what they think. This is another form of authoritarianism on a level that Canadians are unfamiliar with. And if democracy doesn't matter with them, as it appears to be the case in the Liberal Party today, we have a parliament that hasn't functioned since September. By order of the Speaker, the Liberals have refused to divulge information about their green slush fund. That's money that you and I, our children, our grandchildren will have to pay for years to come, that have been divested to make these green grifters very, very rich. The fact that the government is protecting all of that while at the same time changing a leadership, which is going to have pretty much the same policy, while at the same time not bringing Parliament back and not giving the will of the people to give its stamp of imperature on what the government is doing, suggests to me this is a government that doesn't really care about people, doesn't have to worry about people, and of course is acting in a way that is totally anathema to our institutions and our public approval of the kind of direction the country is taking. Mark Carney is going to be a real problem for Canada. And the sooner we get to having an honest discussion about him, rather than his trolls making him look out like he's something that is the greatest thing since sliced bread, is going to be a real challenge, I think, not just for Conservatives, but for folks like me who have been long-standing Liberals, many of us sitting in the wings. And we are not holding back. We are pouncing on this man because he's extraordinarily dangerous for this country.
Well, and that's what we're seeing on our YouTube channel, on our Facebook, on our X profile, just all these people that are singing Carney's praises. And I've been saying it for a little while. I don't have any proof, but it doesn't seem organic. It doesn't seem real. It seems like it's manufactured to make the public think that, wow, everybody else is supporting this guy. Maybe I should too. Well,
and the other thing is that it happened instantly. Like, that was the strange part about this. If people look on Mark Carney's Facebook, Northern Perspective has almost as many followers as Mark Carney, and this is not a new Facebook profile for Mark Carney. So, I think he has 4,800 people that are following him. So he puts out this video, and all of a sudden you have all these comments and people saying, well, I was going to vote Conservative, but I see Mark Carney and I think he's the one for me. And it's scripted. It is just very, very phony looking. And this is what Canadians should really be mindful of.
Well, the number of trolls on places like X, social media, is extraordinary, but we know that they're all funded by Katie Telford. And we know that Katie Telford's going around helping all sorts of green so-called journalists, and those are the only ones that Mark speaks to. I think of National Observer and a few others where they get a lot of money from the federal government. If the public only knew how much money is being given to these other organizations and groups that are basically there to sugarcoat what these people are, they'd be shocked and appalled. And that's what the Liberals have to be very concerned about. A new government is going to blow that wide open, and every one of these phonies is going to get exposed. And every one of these grifters is going to be called to answer how the hell they were able to take so much money from the public. I think they're, rather than them trying to do their best efforts at lawfare and having stacked the Senate so that nothing gets done, I'd be more concerned about an RCMP that does its job and goes after these people once and for all for what I think is, conduct and behaviors that go well beyond the ambit of what Parliament can do. And much of this is being done without parliamentary approval or oversight. This is done by executive authority. So, we used the term technocrat earlier. That means an avoidance of public approval and a public scrutiny of what we're doing. And that's exactly what Canada's given itself to. Is it any wonder that our country and its institutions, and its impression and its reputation abroad has diminished so dramatically? I am not one of those who wants to hold back on this. This is not my Liberal Party. And it certainly isn't the Liberal Party of Lester B. Pearson. It's not the party of Jean Chrétien. It's certainly not the party of Pierre Elliott Trudeau. We had a Democratic Party in which members of Parliament could express what they wanted, and we never allowed one particular vision to dominate the other. It's so bad that in the Liberal caucus, Katie Telford and all the people in the Prime Minister's office take notes on MPs. In my time, no person from the Prime Minister's office was allowed in the caucus, and we could take on any minister, even the Prime Minister, on certain subjects, and we often did. So if Canadians are good with that, and these trolls are trying to project as if they represent Canadians, there are two things that are going to happen. Either this is going to continue to be a fraud that it is, or Canadians are going to be faced with extraordinary hardship because of their undue ignorance and willingness to give over to what appears to be the flavor of the day. But nothing has changed. It's going to get worse for Canadians.
So what can the average citizen do, to stop this?
Well, I think they have to make it abundantly clear whenever they see challenge these people. Who are they? You'll often find there's no names to these individuals. And remind yourself that when you see someone out there that's, easily swayed by the idea that we can grift, that we can give money out, that we can bankrupt the country even further, to ask the question, who's going to pay for that? Because I served as a member of Parliament in the Paul Martin, Jacques Chrétien government. We had to spend a lot of time cutting back programs in order to get the finances of the country straight. We're now at a far worse situation than we were back then, relatively speaking. So our debt now, $62 billion. Even if we're used to 1995 numbers, that's like a $30 billion deficit, $30 billion deficit. That's far worse than what we were concerned about, $20 billion at the time. Sooner or later, and I think it's going to be much sooner, the country's going to get a credit downgrade, significant one. That's once, and let me be very clear to the Dominion bond rating agencies, Morningstar, S&P, all these other ones. You cannot use our pensions, the CPP and the QPP, as some kind of a leverage or collateral against this massive debt, as you've heard. And so Canadians are going to wake up one morning and say, oh my goodness, our AAA credit rating has been downgraded. Now take away the wokesters that work over there, and I often like to insult them because I think they're not doing their job, and they can write all the reports that they want. But once they've made that kind of a critical error in their analysis, they're going to have to say the federal government has no money. Our only sector that's providing us the impetus to maintain our wealth and to maintain our ability to make ends meet is the oil and gas sector. And this government and Mark Carney and Sillege and Stephen Guilbeault and others are irrevocably committed to destroying that sector. And when they do that, when they do more damage to that sector, Canadians are going to have a debt they can never repay, and they can start wishing away the hospitals, the social programs that they take for granted. If you think it's bad now, give it a couple more years.
Well, and that's the problem, right? And, when Chrystia Freeland started rolling out this term, we have the lowest debt to GDP ratio. We called that a right away, in that, she's using the CPP essentially to offset the deficits of the Canadian government. And you can't do that, because it's not like they can just dip into that and spend the CPP. You can't.
Or
do
maybe
that.
They're thinking of trying. Who knows?
Well, it's just their debt position, right? It's almost like, you're going to a mortgage for your to get a mortgage from the bank, and you're trying to use your parents' house as part of your overall credit position. You can't do that because it doesn't belong to you. So. This is the crazy thing that we're seeing now. One of the big factors in what little support the Liberals still have, we think, is coming from the mainstream media, because most people are hearing the propaganda, hearing the talking points. They're parroting that when they're when they're talking to people that oppose this. What role do you think the mainstream media is going to play in a eventual Mark Carney Prime Minister win and the next federal election?
Well, I think they're going to do everything they can to prop him up, support him, and make him look good because he represents the continuity of grift. Let's understand that. Media receive a significant amount of money in terms of support, even though they can't get it from the private sector, even though people are walking away from social media. Programs like this are far more attractive and willing to talk about things that Canadians really are concerned about than the fried up or the made up or the baked questions and responses. That's what I would say on a more general basis. I think Canadians are now starting to realize that the media out there is becoming less and less relevant. Of course, social media is allowing people to look at other modes of communication mediums for their information, and so I would say that media is doing itself no favor by cozying up to the Trudeau agenda. Now we know the CBCs, because when you get a $1.5 billion a year, that buys you an awful lot of good press. But that's going to come to an end. And the other ones that have received part of that $700 million program, that works only for a period of time, at which point you have to realize that that's coming to an end. There will be a new government this is going to come to. And sooner or later, I'm starting to see this in my own case. Media is starting to make the calls again. For the past 2 to 3 years, when I say 20, 30 media days, interviews a day, usually on energy issues, sometimes on consular issues, my areas of expertise. Now nothing. Why? Because they didn't like the fact that I was going up against the green climate bedwetting agenda. And they didn't like that because it crossed with the principles that Katie Telford and others have set down, that thou shalt not speak of these things, because if you want to continue to get this kind of stuff, you're going to have to hire the right people and talk about the right things that we ordain as being important. The fact that they're coming back may be an indication, I think, of what we're seeing in the media, that generally they too have realized the writing is on the wall, save and except for a reprieve with Mark Carney, which I think is going to be very short-lived. The media is, I think, starting to show some deference to change. If it doesn't, then it's going to continue to become irrelevant, not just now, but wait till a new government takes over. Their relevance will be massively felt, and a lot of those companies will go bankrupt and will shut down. I'm not looking forward to that. I don't think it's a great thing, but there's nothing worse than having brought it upon yourselves.
Well, and in terms of media, I think the media it has departed so far from its original purpose that it may need to die in order to actually be reborn again, because you do not have a democracy without an effective media. Because the whole point of media, as you know and our viewers know, is to hold the government to account. They're supposed to be non-partisan. They're supposed to be non-biased. Yeah, you're going to see some bias here and there with a story, but the whole point is to ensure that the government's doing its job. It's almost like having the official opposition, but on a national scale. So this is what they're supposed to do. And what we've seen, especially since we started Northern Perspective, is we've paid a lot more attention to not just what the media communicates, but how they do it. It has been really eye-opening for us, seeing how they spin things. We watch Parliament every single day, and then we see CBC's interpretation, and we just cock our heads and say, how the heck did you spin that way? So it is something else. And the problem is most of the Liberal voters are watching mainstream media, and they're hearing Pierre Poilievre bad, Mark Carney savior. They heard the same thing when Trudeau was in his campaign, and the fact that this doesn't start raising alarm bells is very concerning.
Well, it's because you don't know who's actually real and who's a bot online. I wouldn't be surprised if most of these quote unquote people saying these positive things about Carney are actually bots, and then you kind of get that, well, if they're saying he's good, maybe I'm wrong. You're like gaslighting the public all over again.
Well, and even moving to influence, Dan, I'm not sure if you've been following the polls by Ecos recently, but very strange numbers coming out from the Ecos pollsters. They've even suggested that the 27-point gap from the Conservatives and the Liberals is now down to 4. I don't understand how that could possibly be the case. Allegedly, the owner of Ecos has said that he's going to do everything that he can to make sure the Liberals get elected again. But it's departed from every other pollster, including Nano's polling. So, like, there's definitely some people that have a vested interest in the Liberals continuing to be in power.
Let's understand some of the pollsters. My old campaign manager now runs Main Street. And, these are Liberals. These are people who have bias to begin with. But beyond that, many of them are credible, and many of them are not necessarily beholden to a government that says, hey, do a poll for us that sounds good. We might give you 5 contracts, because government is always polling. A lot of money, a lot of your public money being spent on these pollsters. And so in one way, I'd say, I should be upset with this. The other thing is, no, let them think. Let them think that they're going to win the next election, because the disappointment will be even greater. I saw this with Kim Campbell. I saw this with John Turner. In fact, I saw it in 2011. Who knew that we were going to wind up in third place, with a loss of 40, 50 seats after a loss of 20, 30 seats before that in 2008. The reality, I think, is that we'll let the pollsters play their games, but they know full well that their meal ticket is about to be removed. They're going to lose a lot of their contracts with the government, with the Katie Telfords of this world, the Prime Minister's office, and other ministries, because the government cannot afford to poll for something that isn't necessary and for which there is no money to pay. So it's coming to an end, folks. They can dance, they can jiggle all they want. The reality is that this whole charade of spending public money to give people the impression that you're doing something that's really, whiz-bang and crazy, whether it's our institutions, whether it is our media, whether it is our pollsters, it doesn't really matter. Everyone knows the gig is up, and the public has reached a point of maximum insecurity, and it's in that context that I think it doesn't really matter what you do in the short term. It's all window dressing. You know you're going to be defeated, and let me make it very, very clear to my old Liberal friends: find another job, do something else, stop grifting, because you are going to be out of work the moment there's an election called, and you know that it's coming. Sure as the day is bright.